Good morning, everybody. We are going to start. Welcome to Brussels for those who come from very far, and thank you very much for those who follow us also live. There are many people in the web stream. And if you miss anything, don't worry, because it's also recorded, and you can look at it afterwards. As you know, the Brussels briefing has a regular, you would see that today is a number 50. That is a regular policy debate in Brussels that the CTA is very happy to co-organize with the European Commission, DG Devco leading, but also with other DGs within the European Commission, as well as the ACP group, which stands for Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, which is a group of 80 countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. And thank you so much, ISG, for welcoming us in this house, in this important house, where the ambassadors, the ministers, and the heads of state meet in official meetings. So we are very pleased to be here. And we also co-organize it with Concord, which is a platform of civil society organizations across development, of course, CSOs across Europe, and depending on the topics with other partners. We do organize the briefings since 2007, and we try to bring to the table for discussion and exchange of experience and best practices some of what we think are emerging issues or issues where we have new knowledge to share, new technologies, new thoughts. Of course, I welcome you as well on behalf of my director, Michael Ailou, who is currently in Abidjan with one of the events we co-organize with the African Development Bank, actually on youth entrepreneurship, which is one of the focus of CTA interventions now. So today we look at a very important topic on growing food in the cities. So not only urban, peri-urban agriculture in the traditional sense, but also all the new forms of soil-less agriculture, be hydroponics, vertical farming, aquaponics, rooftop gardens, etc. And all are interesting, are different, fit a purpose, but certainly are there to stay in a more and more urbanized world. So the panels we look at the trends and opportunities, not only across ACP countries, but across Europe. And the second panel will bring more, and thank you for coming, for some of the African countries, successes from entrepreneurs in some of the African countries. And by the way, I'm a bit sad to say that Mr. Pierre-François Benoit, who was our last speaker in panel 2 from Haiti, very successful business, I know it very well, couldn't make it for the visa issue. Visas are becoming more and more difficult, and we have really to do things much more in advance for all activities. But we will have other opportunities to bring him in, so he will not be here, and because of time difference, we cannot also have him online. Also, without more delay, I would like to thank again Mr. Viwanou Gnassounou, who is the Assistant Secretary General in this House, in charge of economic, trade, agriculture, so very important issues for CTA and for all of us. He has a background not only on the public sector, but private sector and entrepreneurship as well, and policy. So thank you very much. I know that you and Mr. Mizzi have important meetings this morning, certainly more important than this one, and that you still found the time to come and support us. So Mr. Gnassounou, thank you very much, and you have the floor on behalf of the ACP.
Merci, Isolina.
Thank you, Isolina. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, ambassadors, dear colleagues, dear participants. Leonard and myself are here because this is what's most important to do right now. We are delighted to be welcoming you here once again to continue our cycle of conferences and discussions on agriculture, and to discuss training on agricultural practices, especially in ACP countries. This cycle has been going on for more than a decade now, and it's shown just how useful it is in terms of capacity building, providing training, and we're very happy to have this topic on the table here today, urban agriculture. Some years ago, it was considered to be a hobby still. It was considered to be something that was done by the bourgeoisie. But today it's considered to be a new opportunity and allows us to bring together a number of policies, whether it be those for food security, nutritional security, also preserving the environment, and town and country planning. When we talk about traditional agriculture, we typically are talking about people who have been doing things for centuries and know what works, what doesn't work, and know where we can make progress. But here, typically, we're dealing with people who maybe don't have the necessary background and who sometimes have the best of intentions, but can engage in practices that represent some difficulties or even threats. So it's very important that we talk about this matter, urban agriculture, and that we bring together the different dimensions it has. Of course, if you look at the first one, which is nutrition, especially in cities, because you can imagine that people can have different approaches when it comes to urban agriculture, whether you look at Europe and so-called developed countries, or whether you look at ACP countries, our ACP countries, because preoccupations can be slightly, if not fundamentally different from one place to the next. Our cities are experiencing very fast growth. We're expecting growing populations. We're trying to make sure that our production chains are shorter and shorter. We want to make sure that what's consumed in cities is produced as close as possible to the cities. But we're also trying to find jobs for this growing urban population. I'm looking at the ambassador from Côte d'Ivoire. We can use Abidjan as an example. Abidjan today is not what it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Recent history has meant that people have moved to Abidjan. These people are there. You can't just send them back from where they came from. So we need to give them occupations and feed them. So you have different histories, different backgrounds in the different cities and countries, and we have to try and find pragmatic and adapted, tailored solutions. I'm certain that in our debate today, we will be asking questions about the models that are to be developed for this practice, because we've moved from individual and cooperative models to full-scale business models that need to be tested and verified. Take them beyond agriculture in and of itself and look at the services that can be built around it. There's possibilities for training, making food available, distribution, beyond production. And there are entire things to be done on a digital level, how you can make information available, how can you be made aware of what's available where and when and how to get there. So those are possibilities for jobs. Because when you talk about development policies nowadays, sooner or later you're going to have to face the fact that our policies have to generate jobs. We're familiar with the figures. The African continent as well. You have about 18 million unemployed youths, to which dozens of millions are added each year. And you need to find employment for these young people. You need to feed them as well. So the challenges are there. I won't go back to the figures because I'm sure that Leonard, who's quite the connoisseur of figures, will be giving you some more. Now, today's topic is multisectoral, multidimensional, and we're quite sure that by having you here today, well, this is going to be the ideal setting for you to discuss these matters in a serene way. in an ideal way. Thank you once again for having come to ACP House, and I wish you a fruitful debate around this matter.
Mr. Gnassounou. Any more delay? Thank you very much, Mr. Mizzi, for being with us. Mr. Mizzi is the acting director at the European Commission, Devco, on planet and prosperity, and is also the head of unit for rural development, food security, nutrition. He has joined the Commission, the European Commission, in 2007. He has worked, and we had the pleasure at CTA to work with him since then at DG Agri, looking at the EU markets, but with the group of ACP, so African, Caribbean, and Pacific, and we are more than happy that he joined the Devco and the development community. He has, of course, a strong background on the policy, but also on private sector, agribusiness, SMEs, including not only across the ACP, but also on the small island economies, being from Malta, but not exclusively. So thank you very much for being here with us. We are very pleased to co-organize with you and the ACP since 2007 those briefings, and that you give us your time on a very busy schedule. So, Mr. Mizzi.
Thank you very much, Isolina. Thank you, Viwanou. It's always a great pleasure. We have a lot of important things, but coming to a CTA briefing first thing in the morning is the most important thing. So I think it's also number 50, so it's a very important milestone of the CTA. It's a topic, I think, which traditionally we speak, we make a reference to the urban and rural urban and the urbanization agenda, but we don't really go into details. And I think today's half-day session will give a bit of ideas of where the opportunities are. We as a directorate are working a lot on the urban agenda, as you know. This is primarily Unit C5. But the topics you tackle has a very overarching dimension. It's not only Directorate C, which is primarily on planet and prosperity, but it has a cross-disciplinary and a cross-cutting dimension. Whether we speak about migration flows, human capital, health, there are underpinnings which impact today's discussions. And just to recall that this topic was, maybe Isolina, you know, this was the communique of the 8th Berlin Agriculture Ministers Summit 2 years ago. So it was very high on the agenda of GFFA 2 years ago. There is a communique, which I think Isolina can, it's part probably of the proceedings, because there you can have an idea of where we come from. So we come from Expo Milan, so that was almost 4 or 5 years ago, with an urban agenda and all the follow-up that stemmed from Milan. And you know all the main drivers. We speak about urbanization as being one main driver, with most of the populations now moving from a rural area to an urban agenda by 2050. Probably around 65–70%. The impact of climate change, which will also have an impact on the vulnerability of rural areas and also secondary cities. So that will also have an impact. Population growth, that's a given, but also extra pressure on natural resources. So I'm also interested in today's proceedings to see how you look at the nexus dimension. We go to the European Parliament, and they want us to look more into the water nexus, the water, food and peace nexus. And so the urban agenda and the territorial approach is an area which traditionally was mentioned, but is not very well developed yet in the daily narrative when we tackle food security and insecurity issues. Clearly, innovation and research is key in this. You can't speak about employment and new innovation systems in greening cities if you don't look into issues like vegetation cover, biodiversity, organic, waste management, challenges around consumption of products which are irrigated by urban wastewater treatment plants. So all this will clearly have issues which resonate from also a food safety point of view. And I think the issue of food safety is also something which you can't avoid when you speak about urban and urban agriculture. I just came from a big symposium in Rome, which was on agroecology. And clearly, the rural, urban, and the urban agenda of agroecology was also mentioned quite at length. So it's also important to see whether a different type of model, which departs from the green revolution type of approach, is an approach, one approach, not only the only approach, which can give sustainable solutions in future megacities. There was a recent article in The Economist showing how the megacities of many sub-Saharan African countries, but also in Asia, will actually increase from the current 10, 15 million amounts to 20, 25, 30 million. So that type of model of growth will also have an impact on food consumption patterns and type of models to actually feed the urban centers. Something which is clearly important when you speak about food systems is dietary patterns. So even there, I didn't capture much about the issue of dietary patterns, but whatever we do in urban agriculture also has a dietary dimension in terms of all forms of malnutrition. So from the traditional that we look at from a development angle, so stunting and wasting, but clearly the big problems that already urban cities and urban centers are confronting in most of the developing world are overweight and obesity. So even in that dimension of food systems, we have to see what type of food system is the best to actually anticipate and try not to solve, but to tackle the problems, because these urban cities will be the cities which will have big problems on public health and sustainability of public health systems and quality of health systems. So if we try to design a model, a food system, which tackles the problems of dietary and future dietary needs, this also can have a positive impact on future public health budgets. Food safety I mentioned. Something which is always mentioned when we speak about rural urban is the affordability dimension. So can you have a food system which is affordable in urban areas, and how do you skew a bit your fiscal and taxation policy systems by discriminating urban populations versus rural populations. So this is also something which one needs to look at and factor in terms of agriculture systems in urban and peri-urban. Should there be any incentives to actually stimulate proximity nodes around urban areas? And is there a risk that you squeeze out a bit the rural communities? So that's something I think which also needs to be looked at in terms of fiscal and the market incentives to stimulate urban and peri-urban agriculture. Convenience. You can't speak about urban agriculture if you do not look at convenience. So I see that a number of case studies are clearly on e-commerce. Viwanou mentioned youth. We have seen in various briefings here the potential of e-commerce ICT applications in urban areas. We speak about Uber Eat type of technologies in big developed countries, but I see this potential also in the developing world. So even those type of models will become more important in terms of convenience, in terms of also of creating jobs and also of empowerment of women in the labor market. This will clearly have a demand, maybe not in 5-10 years time, but not in 50 years time neither, of demand for convenience products which we are used to in the OECD world. And last but not least is the land use dimension. land will become scarcer, so land development, urban and territorial planning procedures will also be a key whenever we discuss the urban agriculture agenda. So it's traditionally an area which is not looked into much detail, but it is a very complex area, and clearly I thank Isolina and the CTA for finding a topic which will clearly be a growth area, and together with the ACP Secretariat look forward to the proceedings. And I know there is always a briefing after in terms of proceedings of the book, which we will circulate to colleagues not only in Devco but in other parts of the Commission services. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the outcome from this meeting.
Thank you very much, Leonard. And we all know in this room that the European Commission and the European Union is the leading donor in the world in development. So it's always, and thanks for still helping our people in developing countries and in the ACP. So we are very pleased to continue to work with you. We will look in length at the different dimensions that you have spoke, both of you, on urban agriculture, peri-urban agriculture. Certainly from CTA, I don't want to repeat or preempt that. Certainly for CTA, our perspective now in our areas, intervention areas and focus, which are promoting youth entrepreneurship and employment, and of course looking specifically at women as well, increasing the profitability and the productivity of smallholder farmers, including through, of course, digitalization. You know that is one of the key areas for CTA, and responding to climate change through sound climate smart agriculture practices are all embedded in this actually in this topic. And different dimensions on food security and nutrition, and you rightly say that is not only food security to feed some of the urban population, which is growing, and by 2050, 70% of the world population will be in cities, in urban. So it will not all be fed, and it's not what we want to demonstrate here, by urban agriculture, but a big part certainly. And not only, as I said, in food security, but on nutrition. The complement of nutritional on fresh fruits and vegetables or dairy and so on is very, very important in cities. We are very much interested on the employment and income, and I'm very pleased that we have some young, actually, from Africa, from Kenya, from Nigeria, young entrepreneurs who have made it in urban agriculture, some using a very high technology driven, and others more on a traditional system, but all successful. And as I said, there is a room for everybody as long as it's a success. Environmental services is very important, and we will talk about that. And of course, the social function is key, and it's the same in Europe. It has really brought together different communities and addressing vulnerable groups in cities as well. So we are very interested in that. We, of course, hope in reading the best experiences across, the world that we have done in the reader you have in your folders. Certainly, we need more policy support to urban agriculture, and policy support, as you rightly say, includes also food safety, protection of markets, organization of stakeholders and value chain actors, like any part of agriculture, traditional agriculture. Is still very much, urban agriculture is still very much, at least in ACP countries, a bit at the production level, and we need much more at the processing and added value part, so that could feed very strategic, niches in products. So this is one. Technology, obviously transfer. We will see some of the very important European cases. We have two speakers who will demonstrate what is possible on the ground and under the ground, like in London, but that requires technology investment, upfront, and we want to see how those models could be eventually transferred to developing countries, and like you said, any other organic or added value really in niche products. Thank you very much. I know that you are running to other meetings, so thank you very much. Thank you.